I think it's really hard to be a brand reaching this younger generation if you're not plugged into social right now. I don't think it's a replacement for a magazine. I don't think we should just pivot to events and suddenly stop like our journalistic integrity. I think it's about really building a brand that is tight and cohesive and reputable and young people can trust.
This is Willa Bennett, editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine and 17 magazine. Hello and welcome to the Create Tomorrow podcast. I'm your host, Cassandra Napoli, head of marketing and events insight at WGSN. Every 2 weeks, I will be taking you on a journey, looking at how brands and consumers are creating tomorrow, whether that's through product innovation, actions and strategies, or online behaviors. Today's episode is about how legacy media is entering its new era. Gen Z has grown up and are coming to power. Willa Bennett, my guest today, is among the youngest to lead a legacy publishing house. She is the editor-in-chief of Cosmo and 17 magazines, and her task is to take a 60-year-old brand such as Cosmo and revive it for a modern audience. Both magazines are part of the host-owned properties. Welcome, Willa. I'm really excited to have you here today. So this podcast is all about focusing on ideas, businesses, or visionaries who are creating a new version of the future. And I think you really embody this quite well. Can you please tell our listeners who you are and what you do as the editor-in-chief of Cosmo and 17 magazines?
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Willa Bennett, coming to you live from Cosmo HQ. It's my office in New York. I'm the editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan and 17 magazines. It's so much more than a magazine, just to say. I feel like editing a magazine is actually only part of it, but it's really about looking at these two brands and positioning them for the next generation.
So I did some digging, and it seems like you are an early end of Gen Z, an elder Gen Z, if you will. Maybe the first Gen Z editor-in-chief, if I'm correct. So with that said, what do you think Gen Z wants from traditional or legacy media today?
I totally believe that I see in the numbers, like Gen Z is definitely buying our magazines, and that's exciting to me. And I think there's so much out there. I think it's just about telling stories that actually speak to that audience and don't kind of talk down about them.
Like myself, many of our listeners will likely have grown up reading these magazines, right? Coming of age with 17 and then kind of growing into young adulthood with Cosmo. Very essential and instrumental in the sort of coming of age and young adulthood experience. I'm curious what the difference is in magazines today, perhaps when I was growing up or when you were growing up.
I think growing up is just different. Cosmo's been around for 60 years, and I think for the past 60 years, it's really like represented this single woman. And I think like womanhood has just drastically changed over the next 60 years. And it's just about Cosmo changing with that. We're obviously not just for women anymore. We really cater to different audiences. I think since I've grown, social's up 121%. On Instagram specifically, I would say we've had like splurge of Gen Z followers, Gen Alpha eventually. But I really think it's just about being in tune with like what growing up is like and then meeting the moment with stories that actually resonate with them. We just did the story on Gabby Windey. I'm not sure if you saw it, and she won the Traders, but really it was her like engagement story, her marriage story. And I feel like that was such a great example of someone that like was in culture, but this was such a beautiful moment in her career and in her relationship. And I was honored that she trusted Cosmo with that.
So who is Cosmo and 17 targeting separately?
Cosmo, we are the authority on love and relationships. That's kind of my tagline I've been really focusing on. Came in 6 months ago and I was like, we don't need to rebrand. Cosmo's already such an incredible brand that means so much to so many people, yourself included. And I think for me, it was really about refocusing it and bringing this brand to the next generation. We have readers who have been reading us for 60 years. We have readers that just started following us because they love the Brenda and Matt cover. I welcome both of them. I think everyone's welcome. I think no matter where you are in your life and in your career and in your female friendships or, not even just your female friendships and obviously your love life, like you can be part of this. And we just empower you to live your best self and live your best life. And I say a lot like, Cosmo isn't supposed to have all the answers, but we're supposed to help you find your own answers. And so that's pretty all-encompassing in terms of audiences. We really define pop culture. We don't just cover it. I think anyone with a phone and is more than welcome to come. And then 17, the tagline is, it all starts at 17. Obviously, college campuses, huge demographic for us, really looking at 17-year-olds. The first cover story was Zaya Wade, and she turns 18 in like a couple months. And that was such a dream story because it really documented, felt like, what it was like for her to be 17. And that was so core to obviously the brand identity.
Yeah. And in your opinion, what is the purpose of magazines in today's climate, right? So back in the day, it was really to inform the masses. Maybe if you were a fashion magazine, you would go to the fashion shows and cover it, and it would kind of end up in the book 3 or 6 months later. But social media has really transformed things, right? And everything is instantaneous. I think what you just said about Gabby Windey is really interesting. She's a part of pop culture right now. She's everywhere. And so you leveraged her for a story. Do you think from a spring issue perspective, it seems like your vision for Cosmo is really acting as this like trusted older sister type, helping readers really figure themselves out and their identities in the process? Is that the purpose? Or you also mentioned an intergenerational opportunity courting older women, Gen X or boomers even, who've had that sort of history with the brand for the last 60 years.
I think it's about digital and social. I think the magazine is so important, and I obviously respect and love it so much. And, I'm so proud of the Brenda and Matt cover, but it wasn't just about it being a print cover story. It was really about the way we showed up and like really explained what we stood for. And it was the first time a romantic relationship has ever been on the cover. And like, to me, the cover was part of the bigger picture that we were trying to depict. And it was a classic love issue, but it didn't just stop at the issue. We had a Cosmo kiss cam through New York. We had a party at the Boom Boom Room with Bumble. We had, a digital cover with Gracie Abrams. Like, we had so much going on, and it wasn't just about a magazine, but the magazine was part of it, is all there's to say. But yeah, I think the purpose of Cosmo is really to be that guiding force for people again. And I don't think like just in your teens or just in college, like you need advice. I mean, right now we published an article last week that was like talking about how there's a rise in divorce among women right now and like why that might be. And like, to me, that is just as important as a story than a Gabby Windey or like a TikToker, for example. Like, to me, they're all like, there's no hierarchy. It's we are the authority in love and relationships. And that I think everyone can relate to, regardless of if you're married or single or struggling with a best friend. Like, I just think it's more universal and authentic that way.
Yeah, we've been in the trend world, we've been talking about the rise of gray divorce quite a bit. So older women finding sort of a new freedom and a new kind of life after marriage. So just that didn't work out. So very on trend with that. You talk about your first cover issue. So you started 6 months ago. The spring issue has just arrived on newsstands, and it features the first romantic couple to ever be on the cover. For our readers, when you say Brenda and Macaulay, that's Macaulay Culkin and Brenda Song, who are a married couple in real life. What did you learn? This was the love issue. What did you learn about what readers want from love? What do you think people expect from love? And how does this impact the kind of stories that you told in that magazine?
Yeah, I think something that drew me to them, obviously they're both like huge child stars. They had their own paths to fame and, in and out of good times and bad times. And they're so like honest about that, which is pretty rare, of course. But what's so interesting about their relationship is something I admire is like, they both are like completely independent people who like came together and just support each other. I mean, even their dynamic on set, I was so blown away by. Like, Brenda Song is like, obviously so articulate and so sure of what she wants. And Macaulay is so supportive of that. And Macaulay is like shy, but funny, but then outgoing. And like, I just felt like the balance of their personalities felt so real to a relationship today. And I felt like from just like a journalistic perspective, there was just so much to write about. They're engaged, but their wedding like isn't their priority right now, which I think is really relatable for people right now. They have kids, but they both work full time. They actually don't have a nanny. They take turns. Sometimes Brenda's mom will step in. And there were just so many like little pieces of information that kept coming out. And I kept seeing like little tweets about them. And, there's this Hall of Fame moment that's pretty famous that Macaulay basically thanks her. And it's really the first time that they acknowledge their romantic relationship publicly in such a big way. And basically the ceremony was him getting a star in Hollywood, for those who don't know. And in the speech, he's like, thank you to Brenda Song, like my fiance. And the internet was like, wow, they're dating. So there's so many like smaller cultural conversations about them. They represented something. And I think with magazine covers more and more, and it doesn't even have to be print. I just think in general, it's like you have to tell real stories. It was the same with Gabby Windy. That was a digital only, social only, but it was like, it was a story. Like she is doing something in culture right now and she has something to say. And, she got secretly married and why didn't she tell anyone? There was so much lore around that. And I think more and more, there's so much out there. I mean, celebrities can post photos of themselves whenever they want. It's really about being additive and it's about telling a story that makes you actually stop and think or see your phone and be like, wow, I want to read that. That is something that's not just fluff.
Yeah, I think part of the love issue too was exploring lots of different topics as it relates to love. There's been so much conversation around how running clubs are the new love or the new dating apps and dating apps are dying. But one story that I thought was particularly interesting was the story on politics. So in the trend world, we've been talking about this sort of like fracturing of the generations, right? Young people, men typically leaning a little bit more conservative and women typically leaning a little bit more liberal. And there was a story about how to date across party lines. I was just wondering what you learned from that and kind of what you think listeners who are typically brands for this podcast can take away from that conversation.
The writer Vera, she actually came to us with the story. She is amazing. Follow her on Instagram. She spent a year doing this, like truly a year of her life. She went on some alt-right dating apps and she decided that she was going to see if she could truly, and by the way, like a lot of this was before even Trump was elected. Like she was just like, I am genuinely curious if I could date someone with like the complete opposite politics of me. I don't want to give it away in case you haven't read it. Should I give it away? I don't know. What do you think?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, spoiler, like she couldn't do it. But she goes on all these dates and I think what was interesting is how she pulls out the more like humanizing moments. And then she's like, wait, I can't. And I feel like what was interesting about the story and the way she wrote it is like, she really like tried to have an open mind and just like couldn't. And she realized about herself, there were moments where like, she just was like, I actually can't look past this. And so in dating, I think there's an expectation that like, there's times where, you're talking to your friend and you're like, we are so different. Like, is that good? And this just felt like a different level because it was more about values than even maybe candidates, I would say. But it's interesting on the last season of Love is Blind, we were just talking about this on staff. 2 relationships actually end because 2 of the contestants like won't disclose their politics. And so I definitely think like more and more we're going to hear stories like this, not just from pop culture, but just, in the zeitgeist in general, where it's like, as we become more and more polarized, obviously, what does that do with dating? And how does that impact our friendships and the way we're connect with each other? And I think it totally makes sense that, if you're, in Vera's case, like on a date with a man who like fundamentally doesn't believe in abortion, it's like, yeah, of course. So it's interesting, but I think there's gonna be a lot more stories like this popping up, I would say.
Yeah, it aligns with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about in the trend world about the great polarization, meaning that societies are only fracturing further and they're actually, the bits that fractured off in the past are now fracturing themselves. So it's just getting micro and micro and micro, niche. So very, very spot on there. I was flipping through the latest issue and I noticed Club Cosmo exists, right? And that really offers subscribers access to exclusive events, special content, that kind of thing. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but like Gen Z, young people in general are really desperate for connection and community. They're really wanting to forge friendships in real life settings. There's something called collective effervescence, which is like this kind of like electric harmony you feel when you experience something together with other like-minded people. And I think these sorts of in real events kind of embody that quite well. Do you think that in real life events, I've seen some other media brands doing them too, are the future of media?
No, I don't think we should all pivot to events is what I'll first say. But I will say like, we did this party for Valentine's Day at midnight. We did like a countdown till Valentine's Day. It was February 13th at the Boom Boom Room, which is like a really historic, iconic place in magazines. So we had like the Boom Boom Room and we partnered with Bumble. And when you walked in, if you were single, you got a yellow wristband. And we encourage people all night to be like meeting someone new. And I think what I've learned from that, just from people who have reached out to me after, is like a lot of connections were made. And I think what was so successful about it, even from like a dating perspective, is like like-minded people gathering. And it is kind of similar to run clubs where it's like another app, like it does kind of feel like homework to a lot of these people. So I think being able to, again, have a brand that has the IP where you can, host an event one day and then, have a run club or have an email subscriber list. Like having all of that is so key. And it's definitely top of mind.
I want to go back to social media because I just think there's so much to unpack here. You yourself come from a social media background. You're a social media editor. Do you think that media outlets really need to think socially first when creating magazines? And how does social media, whether that's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, really impact the creation process?
That's interesting. I think I'm on it all the time naturally. I communicate with my own peers that way. And so I have always really been like online, and even I think back to like when I was a teenager, like I was obsessed with like magazines, but I also like was obsessed with Tumblr, to be honest, and LiveJournal and MySpace, and I wrote fan fiction. So like I think I've always just like had all of it, and it's never felt like one or the other. I think back to when I was growing up and like some of my favorite magazine covers I would like go look up on Tumblr and then pin them. So I don't know. To me, it's like all connected. I think it's really hard to be a brand reaching this younger generation if you're not plugged into social right now. I just think even though there are pockets of this demographic that maybe want to be online less or don't post to Instagram, but it is just so part of their world. I mean, think about it. Like a large percentage of them even grew up during COVID when like they didn't have real life prom. They didn't have real life classes. So it is such a part of their world and the way they can communicate and connect. I think you have to be plugged in, but no, I don't think it's a replacement for a magazine. I don't think we should just pivot to events and suddenly stop like our journalistic integrity. I think it's about really building a brand that is tight and cohesive and reputable and young people can trust.
So speaking about, catering to what readers want, which is maybe like a multi-channel approach to a magazine. They want tangible, tactile magazines. They want social media experiences. They want in real life events. When it comes to 17, I think it's a little different probably, or I'm imagining it's quite different because how do you kind of get in the headspace of a 17-year-old as a 30-year-old woman? And I'm sure you have many staff that are much older than 30, right? So we interviewed Claire's recently, the VP of Claire's, and she said she co-creates with alphas, right? She spends time kind of understanding the niche little words that they're talking about, the slang that they use, which is quite different from Gen Z. Almost feels like a foreign language. How do you sort of integrate into the spaces of teenagers to ensure that you're delivering what they want?
College campuses, I speak at a lot of college campuses. I love to do it. I think it is so important. It's how I dreamed of having a job like this was because someone came to my college campus and I like went to one of those talks in like a 7 p.m. and was like, wow, like I could be a magazine editor. So I think it's really important. And I've always made an effort to do that. But also we have contributors. And like at the end of the day, like, I'm not writing the stories. Like, I really am curating pitches I get. And I get some amazing pitches from first-time writers. And there's this photographer, Eleanor, who goes to NYU that cold emailed me an idea to do street style on NYU campus. And I was like, I would love that. Sounds good. And it went live. And, it's like, I don't know anyone in it, but I do know that like I trust her taste and I trust her curation. And I think she has a really, really, really great lens on what it's like to go to school in New York right now. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. And I think as we build out 17 more and more, I'm obviously only a couple months in, we're only one cover, and it is going to be about really like paying attention to the demographic and also giving them the platform, truly.
Yeah. Another thing that got me thinking as you were talking is a big idea that we were forecasting for 2025 is this idea of niche is the new norm. So there's no such thing as sort of a mass pop culture anymore. When you and I were young, we might have had like Britney Spears and, these big celebrities that really define the culture. But because of TikTok, it's really accelerated trends and nostalgia cycles in general. And, we could have somebody really, really niche emerge and they have a loyal fan base. And that to them, that's their Britney Spears, right? And so I'm just wondering how it must be really hard to kind of be everywhere all at once, right? To kind of consume culture when everything is trending at the same time and niche is the new norm. And there's just so many kind of trending ideas at the moment. How do you sift through that? And how do you pick what's worthy for your magazines, both 17 and Cosmo?
It's all about curation. I mean, you can't be everything to everyone. That's like physically impossible. And I don't think I'd be doing a good job if I was saying yes to everything. It really is about curating the right stories for both magazines and paying attention, but also making decisions and forecasting trends and also just like watching the market and the demographics and kind of going back and forth about it. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of it is instincts. I think really hard about all the decisions, but also at the end of the day, like I usually know the answers. it'll come to me. And I think, again, like you just can't be everything to everyone. I think I wouldn't be doing a good job if I would just put whoever's the most famous on the cover. Like it just doesn't work like that. It's really about the stories. And I mean, I've said no to so many covers that like there just isn't the right story for us right now. And, it doesn't mean that like I'm not a fan of the celebrity. It doesn't mean that I am not like, don't think it would be a great story for a different magazine. But I think being so sure about who you are as a brand is kind of the key because, again, like you said, like trends are coming and going faster than they've ever come before. It's wild. I mean, one day someone can be at the top of their game and then the next day it's like the trend is over. And then, there's also, I think, a lot of people out there and a lot of voices that are identifying trends being like, this is it, this is going to blow up, this is it going to blow up. And I think I'm a little more hesitant to do that. And I am not trying to like take credit for like noticing things. I'm just really trying to make content that speaks and responds and is in conversation with this demographic.
When you're hiring for your staff, maybe this is a better question. Are you looking for a sort of diverse kind of background staff? I know in trend forecasting, we love people who come from all walks of life, right? Designers, media people, scientists, the varied, the better, because together we can come together and build a version of the future that makes the most sense, right? Because it comes from diverse perspectives and backgrounds and disciplines. Is it the same in terms of consuming culture? Like, do you love the fact that I'm sure many of your team members come from all different walks of life all over the country or even the world? How does that help in kind of dissecting culture in a way that makes sense for your readers?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. In terms of hiring, I think obviously taste is really important. I think instincts are really important. I think it's really hard to get that from a job interview though. So I think, it's about having like an open dialogue about what they see working in general, what brands are doing well, what are not, and kind of just like having open conversation. But honestly, like this is probably less relevant to this audience, but I think like really good management, no matter like where you are on the masthead, just like taking it really seriously is important to me. And I've noticed that I just think like management will never, it's like one of those things you can invest in is like invest in your people and it will always be worth it. And so I really like love people that take their teams really seriously and take their work really seriously and are to have hard conversations with me or with other people about, I actually don't think that cover line's right. Like I really do welcome that in my staff and I love nurturing that. And, it's interesting, even just like over time, I'll be like, why did this cover work? Why did this cover not work? And, just people being like, I like it or don't like it, like isn't enough for me. I'm like, okay, but why? And really pushing them to just be able to articulate it. And again, like, even if I don't agree with it, I really want my staff to always be able to just articulate why maybe it didn't.
Yeah. And then in terms of like you spoke to the fact that you've got like an intergenerational approach to the magazine. I'm sure internally there's also intergenerational staff, right? I'm sure there's some staff that are a bit older, maybe some Gen Zers. Are you finding there's a difference in terms of how they consume culture and how they raise ideas, pitches even? The age spectrum is an idea that we have at WGSN that we've been forecasting. And it's this idea that like actually younger people are maturing quicker and older people are staying younger longer. And so I'm just curious from a pitch perspective, from an internal perspective, is this something that you're seeing in your staff, like in terms of their approach to consuming culture?
Oh, that's interesting. I think probably less so in media, honestly, because we all are kind of like, like talking about the same articles at times. And like, I think less so in probably this profession. But that's a really interesting take. I definitely like think the way that generationally like dating will be talked about is like so fascinating to me. And even just, I was talking about this the other day with someone on staff where it was like, even just like the situationship of it all, like the way that Gen Z talks about situationship is so fascinating because it's like, now it's just like a term for like any sort of casual, not official relationship. So that's kind of interesting. But no, I don't think there's really like a generational divide and I also think like, at the end of the day, like we are all paying such close attention, regardless of where we are in the masthead or where we were born and when we were born, like to social media platforms, because it's so inherent into like what Cosmo is that I think we're all pretty aligned on that.
What can you tell us about your next issue, if you can tell us anything, and perhaps a little bit about your long-term vision as the new editor?
Yeah, I'm actually really, really, really excited about the next issue. Truly. I'm editing right now. I obviously can't tell you who's on the cover, but it is really looking at romance from a bunch of different and like romance tropes and books. I'm really excited about the romance imprint. And so this issue kind of highlights parts of that, which I'm really, really, really excited about. Yeah, I'm honestly just feeling like so excited and grateful. And I feel so grateful that the first issue did so well because I feel like now it's really clear what we're going to be about, and we're going to stand for love, and we're going to stand for, figuring out who you are, and we're never going to pretend to have all the answers, but like we are a place that like readers can come and ask whatever they need. And yeah, I'm super, super excited.
Okay. And like always, my final question for all of my guests is, who is somebody that you admire who's creating a version of tomorrow that inspires you?
I honestly think what Dochi's doing is really, really special. Like genuinely, I was at the Grammys. I think this is why this is top of mind. I was just at the Grammys, and watching her performance was just like so special. Like I can't articulate what the feeling was like in the room, because it's just no one's doing what she's doing.
Thank you to my guest, Willa Bennett, the editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan and 17 magazines. If you're a WGSN subscriber, look out for more trends at WGSN.com. If you're not a subscriber, please come and discover our services. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time for our next episode. In the meantime, you can catch the CEO of WGSN, Carla Buzasci, next week on our other podcast, Lives of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Cassandra Napoli. Be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast, and see you next time.